Hey guys, I was about 5, 6 minutes into the previous video and it just collapsed on me. So unfortunately, not the project, the video itself, it just shut off. So anyway, what I'm doing is I'm going in tandem between the Jomon watering vessel project, historical piece, as well as the terracotta Western Han Dynasty terracotta sculptural piece, which will be a standing figure. So do some research on what those look like, those actual forms that have been made in antiquity or in history. Jomon is coming from Japan and Han Dynasty is coming from China. Okay, so I'm going to pan down and show you what I was covering in the previous video that shut off. I'm scoring and slipping with the watering vessel here for the Jomon piece, and I'm scoring deeply with my scoring tool, not just superficially scratching. I'm just cutting deep, about a quarter of an inch into the clay. And then adding the slip, which was courtesy from Kyle, distributing this, and just embedding the slip into those scoring grooves. This is something that we've done before. I'm making the coils in my hand and rolling out just half and half. Also, I'm leaving this uncovered a little bit while I'm working because I'm going to hollow the underside out for the Han Dynasty terracotta figure. All right, now one thing that you didn't see is I had my trusty plastic that was completely covering the forms as well as underneath on the bottoms of the forms, so that these plaster sheetrock boards don't dry them out too fast. All right, so whenever you're first rolling them out, that's the way to keep them nice and preserved with their moisture. So now what I'm doing is I'm starting with a thicker piece of clay and I'm rolling from the center up and then flipping it over and rolling from the other center, or from the center to the other end, and making my coil. And I'm going to push down and add an angle. Push down and add an angle. You don't have to score the coil. All right, you're just scoring the base slab. All right. Now I'm going to make it a little more circular, still keep to that oval shape a little bit. Okay. And when I'm pinching, I'm not pinching straight down, I'm pinching down at like a 45, using my thumb to pinch down at a 45 in the middle and my fingers as guards on the outside after putting the additive slip underneath the coil on the base slab. Okay. Because when you look at the Jomon watering vessels, you'll see that they go out and then they dramatically start to come back in with a really expansive shoulder, and then they taper back in, and then they start to flare back up with a rim, all right, or the opening of the vessel. So now what I'm going to do is just going to go in and smooth this coil into the base, and hopefully this video won't shut off on us. I think what happened is I didn't shut it down last night on my laptop, and it probably started working this morning. It was confused and it didn't have its cup of tea yet, so hopefully a few minutes of rest was enough. Okay, so I just took those two additive pieces and I just compressed them together, rolling out the coil in hand, and now at an angle like the diagram I showed you in class, whenever you want it to go out, you have the coils. Let's see if I get my fingers right. So if you want it to go straight up, you do coil on coil like that. And if you want it to go out and away from the center, you do coil at an angle, at a diagonal coming down on the coil underneath of it, the base coil. All right. Roll out some more. I'll just do a few of these, then I'll get working on the terracotta soldier so that these videos are not super long. Whoops, tore too much off there. Recompress it, get some more. Great thing is when the clay's still nice and wet, you can just refold it into itself as long as you got proper compression so that you don't have any air in there. Okay. I'm going to push down at an angle. Take the extra, pinch it again, trying to keep it that 45, because again these are going to flare out quite a bit and then come back in. And then remember, I need to keep the piece at about 10 inches tall, so which is just a little bit off the screen there. All right, so I'm going to go in and smooth this down. into the inside, just like that. And you really just want to make sure that this attachment is good and strong on the bottom. So really emphasizing the coils smoothed out towards the base, as well as any overlapping coils. Really focus on your compression going all the way around. So just because you've added the coil, it doesn't mean you're done with the compression and the movement of the coil all the way around. So I go back in and I apply less pressure than whenever I'm originally applying the coil onto the previous coil under it. But I'm with that subtle amount of pressure, realigning the coils to try to keep the shape the way that I want it. And if I notice any discrepancies or anything like openings, gaps, cavities, or anything like that where I've added the coils, that's when I come in and smooth it out, or I add another small little piece of coil or clay in that area and then smooth it out, because now is the time to be doing that. All right. So now you can see it's starting to flare out a little bit. You can see here it's subtly flaring out. I'm leaving the bottom a little bit thicker just to kind of hold the form together. And then what will happen is with the next video, I'll add more coils and we can start getting all the way out to the underbelly of the Jomon watering vessel, and then we'll start dramatically coming in with that shoulder. Okay, so we'll leave that the way it is. We'll leave it uncovered. Any extra clay that we have, keep it in your bag of clay. And remember, cover up that bag of clay with the top part of the plastic. All right, so that's the Jomon watering vessel, starting with just simply dealing with adding the base coils at this time. All right, that was just 2 layers of coils. Now, excuse me, what I'm doing is, one thing that I mentioned in the last video before it crashed is this was covered in plastic, but the bottom of it was not. The bottom of it I left on top of the wear board overnight. And the reason I left it on the wear board overnight is because I wanted it to set up just a little bit, because I'm going to carve out the bottom. So once I get that, as we're working these projects up, you'll be surprised how much these sheetrock boards draw the moisture out of the clay. So what I recommend, especially if your environment is pretty dry and arid like my apartment is we cover the entire piece. When we're done with it for the day, we cover the entire piece with the plastic underneath the bottom of the project as well. Then we put the project back on to the wear board. And I'll show you that once I'm done with this video. All right, so I'm flipping this over. This is going to be my bottom. I want to leave a little bit of a wall. So I'm going to draw out the area, kind of a concentric rectangle on the inside, or one that follows the dimensions or the parameter of the wall, the outside of it. Okay, so I drew that out. A lot of this is self-explanatory, but now what I want to do is I want to carve this. We don't want to leave this project this thick, right? What happens if we leave it this thick? It could crack, and more than anything, we might not be able to get the primary, which is the chemically compound water, or even the secondary water, out slow enough because it's so thick. And then that's what creates explosions in the kilns, which luckily we had a little bit of experience with before we were dismissed from the university or from the college. So you have a little bit of an idea of how the kilns work. So just using this to try to keep it as even as possible. Okay, we're already almost going on 10 minutes on our video, so what I'll do is I'll show you how much I'm removing. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to get it a little less than half inch thick. All right, a half-inch thickness is really the max we should be working with whenever it comes to our community college situation. If you have your own studio, you can leave the clay fairly thick and you just fire it much, much slower. But because of our environment, we have to fire the pieces and work on getting the pieces a little bit thinner. Plus, of course, it's great practice to get the projects thin, not super, super thin, but thin enough where we won't have any catastrophes. In our last kiln firing, I did check it before I left out of the college, and everything looked really good. So the glaze kiln looked good. There was no cracking. There was no issues there. So hopefully we will be getting back together and finalizing all that at some point. Okay, so I've hollowed all this out, all this extra clay here. What do we do with it? Put it back in your bag, lay this down for a minute so that it doesn't dry out. Remember, the amount of clay that we have at home is what we have available, so just be very conservative. And then now what I'm going to do is that hard edge that I might have created by displacing the clay in the middle that I carved out. I'm going to realign that, make sure that that edge there isn't too sharp. I'm going to kind of make it rounded by massaging it with my finger. If it's too sharp, what could happen is it creates a surface tension that we don't want, and which can create a crack, which will continue through the rest of the piece. So trying to round it as much as possible is a little more of a affinity for clay. Affinity kind of likes to be rounded. Clay likes to be rounded. It has an affinity to do that. And then I'm just kind of smoothing out the inside with my finger to make it consistent. The inside structure is just as important as the outside form. That's also known in architecture. So the engineering on the inside is equally important as the facade or the outside. Because if the inside isn't well structured and if something goes wrong mechanically or technically, it will be revealed on the outside. So it's the same architectural concept whenever it comes to this piece. So now what I'll do is I'll let this set up a little bit. This will be this video. Okay, put my projects and my tools aside. I'll put my tools aside, put my clay aside, cover up my clay, all right, wrap it up, put the rubber band on it. And then now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my plastic, take my piece, my Jomon, I'm gonna put it in this part of the plastic, leave it there, and then I'm going to take this in because I want this to set up a little bit. I want to have that air cavity in there now. I'm going to work on that next, but I don't want to completely cover it. I'm just going to cover up the top, maybe tuck it over the sides just a little bit because I want it to draw some of the moisture out, but not too much. Then compress this down and have it hug the pieces, just like that. If you want to, you can take your yardstick, your meter stick, lay it on there, make sure that if there's wind blowing, nothing blows it up, okay? Blows the bag up away from the project. So just be mindful of that. If you're using your slip, just make sure that you're putting the plastic back over the top of the slip. Don't let that get too dry too fast. If it starts to get dry and cracky or dehydrated, just add a little bit of water, rehydrate it. All right, and we'll leave this the way it is, and then we'll move forward with the next video. And it looks like this one didn't crash, so great. Talk to you soon.